It was a quiet evening at a small, cozy restaurant in the heart of the city, the kind of place where the lights are soft, the air smells faintly of baked bread, and the clinking of plates mixes gently with soft chatter. Among the diners, a young girl was setting up in a corner. She wasn't there for herself, at least not exactly. Her hands trembled slightly, but only from nerves, not weakness. She carried a small keyboard, the one she had saved up for over months, and placed it carefully on the chair in front of her. She took a deep breath and looked around. The restaurant was busier than usual that evening. Families laughed over dinner, couples whispered to each other, and the waiter rushed past with trays of steaming food. No one seemed to notice the girl just yet. She quietly plugged in her keyboard and pressed a key. A soft, pure note filled the corner of the room. It was small, almost shy, but it caught the attention of a few nearby diners. They smiled politely, intrigued by the sound. The girl was only 13, maybe 14. She had grown up in a home filled with love, but also with worry. Her parents worked hard, but medical bills for her upcoming surgery had begun piling up. Every doctor's visit, every test, and every consultation added to the weight her family carried. They wanted her to have the care she needed, but money was always a struggle. That's why she had started performing at the restaurant. Not for fame, not for attention, but for hope. She had learned to play music when she was very little. At first it was just for fun. She would sit at the small piano in her school music room and let her fingers wander across the keys. But as the months went by and her medical condition worsened, music became more than fun. It became a way to survive. Not in the literal sense, but a way to help her family survive. Every note she played carried a silent wish. Maybe someone would stop, listen, and care enough to help. As she began her first song that night, her fingers moved carefully but confidently. She played softly at first, letting the sound blend with the background of conversation and laughter. People nearby started to notice. A few stopped eating, leaning a little closer, curious about the music. Her eyes flicked to the tip jar she had placed nearby. It wasn't much, just a small glass cup with a few coins and dollar bills. But each coin meant something, a little closer to the surgery she so desperately needed. Her parents had told her not to be discouraged. Just do your best, her mother had said that morning. People will see your heart in your music, and that's what matters. And so she played, not for applause, not for recognition, but for a family who needed her courage, and for herself, who wanted to believe that hope could exist even in hard times. The restaurant staff were used to seeing her there by now. They had grown to love her performances. She wasn't loud or demanding. She didn't ask for attention. She simply played, and the music had a way of reaching people's hearts quietly, without forcing anything. Tonight, even with the restaurant crowded, she felt the same calm determination she always did. Every note was a step toward something bigger, even if she didn't yet know what that something was. As she played her second song, a few diners began to drop coins and bills into her tip jar. Some left them silently, without looking at her. Some whispered encouraging words. "Beautiful playing," one person said. "Keep going, kiddo," said another. Each small act of kindness warmed her heart, reminding her that people were good, that there were still strangers in the world willing to help if they could. She glanced at the clock. Hours passed quickly when she was absorbed in the music. Her fingers ached, but she didn't stop. Every coin in that jar was more than money. It was a sign that maybe, just maybe, her dream of getting the surgery soon could come true. She imagined herself healed, running, laughing, and living without the constant fear that had shadowed her for so long. That thought gave her strength to continue, despite the quiet courage in her heart. She couldn't help but notice a few new faces in the restaurant that night. A small group had entered and sat in the far corner, speaking in low voices. One man, in particular, seemed different. He didn't talk much, but there was a calm attention about him. He looked toward her corner a few times, his eyes following the music as it floated through the room. She didn't know it yet, but this stranger was about to change her life in ways she could never imagine. But for now, she didn't think about that. She focused on her music, on the notes that danced beneath her fingers. She played for the hope that someone might understand. for the quiet dream that maybe her family wouldn't have to worry so much, and for the belief that even a small girl could make a big difference with just a little courage. As the evening wore on, more people began to notice. Some smiled, some nodded their heads, and a few whispered to each other, clearly impressed by the emotion in her playing. The girl didn't stop. She had learned that music could speak the words she couldn't say, could carry the emotions that were too heavy for her young heart to express. And tonight, every note, every chord, every soft melody she played was a step toward something she didn't yet fully understand, a step toward hope, kindness, and maybe even a miracle. By the time the restaurant started to wind down for the night, the girl's tip jar was fuller than she had expected. But more importantly, she had felt the quiet warmth of people noticing, people caring, and people connecting with her story without her even saying a word. She packed up her keyboard carefully, thanked the staff, and smiled at the few remaining diners who had stayed to listen until the end. And in that small, cozy restaurant, a quiet sense of possibility began to bloom. She didn't know it yet, but that night would mark the beginning of something extraordinary, something that would show her that courage, music, and a kind heart could change the course of her life forever. The next evening at the restaurant was different from all the others. The girl arrived early, just like she always did, carrying her small keyboard in her arms. She had set it down gently, making sure it was steady and ready for her music. The restaurant smelled warm and inviting, with the aroma of freshly baked bread and simmering sauces filling the air. It was her favorite time of the day, not because it was quiet or peaceful, but because it meant she could play her music and pour her heart into every note. She adjusted her small stool and ran her fingers over the keys once, letting the soft sound echo through the corner. Her parents had come with her tonight, mostly to make sure she was safe. They watched from a distance, giving her the space she needed but staying close enough to help if anything went wrong. They knew the routine by now. She would play for hours, giving everything she had, and the restaurant's regulars would drop coins and small bills into her tip jar. But tonight, something felt different. The bell above the door jingled more often than usual, and the girl's eyes flicked up each time a new customer entered. She smiled politely at the people who glanced her way, but returned quickly to her music. She had learned that staring at faces while playing could make her nervous. Music was her comfort, her shield, and her voice. She wanted it to reach people, but she didn't want the attention to distract her. As she started her first song, her fingers dancing across the keys with care and emotion, she noticed a few new faces in the restaurant. They were seated at a table near the back, talking quietly and not looking at anyone else. One man in the group caught her attention. There was something calm and focused about him, a quiet presence that made it hard to look away. He wasn't fidgeting or checking his phone. He simply sat back, watching her play. The girl's heart beat a little faster. She didn't know who he was, and she had learned to be careful with strangers. Sometimes people would come into the restaurant, drop a few coins, and leave without saying a word. Other times they would smile, give her a kind word, and move on. But this man seemed different. There was no rush, no distraction. Just a stillness that made the music feel even more alive. She kept playing, letting her emotions flow through the soft melodies. Each note was careful, thoughtful, and full of meaning. She played not for attention, but because it was the only way she could share her story. Music had become a language she could speak fluently, a language that could tell people about her dreams, her struggles, and her hopes without needing a single word. Her parents watched quietly from their table nearby. Her mother's hand rested lightly on her father's arm, both of them proud but nervous. It wasn't easy to see their daughter working so hard, giving everything she had at such a young age. They knew that every tip she received brought them closer to covering the cost of her surgery. Every small donation was a step toward hope, and yet they couldn't help but wish that someone, anyone, would step in to help them in a bigger way. As the evening progressed, the restaurant grew busier. Waiters moved quickly between tables, and the soft background music played from the speakers, blending with the sounds of plates, silverware, and conversation. The girl didn't let it bother her. She focused on her music, her fingers moving over the keys with grace and precision. She played songs she had learned from memory, improvisations she had created herself, and melodies that reflected the emotions she carried inside. A few people started to drop coins into her tip jar, whispering words of encouragement. "You play beautifully," one woman said softly as she left a dollar bill. Another diner smiled, nodding toward her jar. "Keep going, kid. You've got talent." Each small gesture warmed the girl's heart and gave her strength. She had learned to accept kindness with quiet gratitude, knowing that even small actions could make a big difference. But the man at the back table continued to watch quietly. He didn't speak to anyone, didn't take out his phone, didn't fidget. He simply observed, his gaze steady, as if he were trying to understand the story hidden in the music. The girl noticed him glance up a few times, and though it made her nervous, it also gave her a strange sense of reassurance. It was as if someone finally saw the effort she was putting in, someone who could feel the emotion behind each note. She moved on to a slower song, one that carried more sadness than the others. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the intensity of the emotion she poured into the music. She thought about the nights she had spent worrying about the surgery, about the bills, and about how her parents had worked so hard to give her the best life they could. She thought about the hope that maybe, just maybe, someone would notice and care enough to help, and then something happened that she didn't expect. A small hush fell over part of the restaurant. Some diners stopped talking, others leaned in slightly, and even the waiters paused in their work for a moment. The music had touched something in the room, and the girl felt a surge of emotion. She didn't stop playing, but she felt the energy of the people around her. She realized that music could connect people in ways words sometimes say OULD single quotes do. The man at the back table finally spoke, but not to her directly. He whispered something to the person next to him and then reached quietly into his bag. He didn't draw attention to himself. He simply placed a small envelope on the table, the kind of envelope that made it clear he wasn't just leaving a tip, he wanted to give something more meaningful. The girl didn't see it yet, but her heart would recognize the gesture later. As the evening wore on, more people began to notice her. Some came closer, quietly listening, moved by the emotion in her playing. Others dropped coins and bills into her jar, some with words of encouragement, others silently. She had learned that every act of kindness, no matter how small, could feel enormous when someone needed hope. And tonight, hope seemed to be gathering around her like a gentle, invisible light. The girl's parents watched with mixed emotions. Pride, worry, and gratitude filled them all at once. They had always believed in her talent, but seeing people respond so genuinely to her music made them realize how special their daughter truly was. They whispered to each other softly, trying not to disturb her. But they shared a quiet understanding. Something about tonight felt different, as if the world had opened a tiny door of possibility for their family. By the end of her set, her fingers were tired, but her heart was full. She had played with all the emotion she had, and for the first time in a long while, she felt the weight of worry lift just a little. Something about the evening had shifted. Maybe it was the way the diners responded. Maybe it was the quiet presence of the man at the back, or maybe it was the small envelope he had left behind. She didn't know yet, but she felt a sense of anticipation she hadn't felt before. As she packed up her keyboard carefully, she felt her parents approach. They smiled at her warmly, proud and relieved at the way she had handled the evening. "You did wonderfully tonight," her mother said softly. "Everyone could feel your heart in the music." Her father nodded, adding, "You made a difference tonight, more than you realize." The girl smiled quietly, trying not to let the tears well up in her eyes. She had learned that music could speak the things words could not. It could carry hope, emotion, and even courage. And tonight, she had seen that music had the power to connect people, to touch hearts, and maybe even to change lives. Little did she know, the man who had quietly watched her from the back table wasn't just anyone. He was someone whose kindness and quiet attention would soon turn her life in a way she could never have imagined. But for now, all she knew was the soft thrill of a night where her music had reached out into the world and found a place in someone's heart. As she walked out of the restaurant with her parents, Carrying her keyboard carefully, she felt a spark of hope. A hope that maybe, just maybe, help was on the way. She didn't know how or when, but she had learned that every note she played had meaning, and that someone, somewhere, could hear her story through the music. And that thought, simple but powerful, carried her forward into the night. The next evening, the girl returned to the restaurant, carrying her small keyboard as always. She had played there countless times before, but tonight she felt a little nervous. She wasn't sure why, but there was something in the air that felt different. The lights were warm, the smell of fresh bread and simmering sauces filled the room, and the gentle hum of conversation blended with the clinking of plates. It was the kind of evening where small miracles sometimes felt possible, even if no one expected them. She set up her keyboard in the usual corner and took a deep breath. Her parents stayed nearby, smiling and offering quiet encouragement. "You're going to do wonderfully tonight," her mother said softly. Her father nodded in agreement, adjusting the strap of his bag as he watched her prepare. They had grown used to these evenings, to seeing their daughter give everything she had in music, but there was always a mix of pride and worry. They knew how hard she worked, how every coin in the tip jar mattered, and how much hope she carried in her small heart. She began to play softly, her fingers moving carefully over the keys. Each note was gentle but full of emotion, carrying a story she could not put into words. She played melodies she had composed herself, songs filled with longing and hope, and some of the simple tunes she had learned at school. Her music had always had a way of drawing people in, of making them stop for a moment and listen. Tonight was no different. A few diners leaned in slightly, their meals forgotten for a moment as the sound of the keyboard filled the room. As she continued, she noticed a few new faces in the restaurant. Among them was the same man she had seen the evening before. He sat quietly at a table near the back, not saying much, simply observing her music with a calm intensity. There was a stillness about him that made her curious, but she kept her focus on the keys. She had learned not to be distracted by people watching. Music was her world, and in that world, nothing else mattered except the story she was telling through each note. Hours passed quietly. She played song after song, her fingers moving with precision and feeling. Some diners dropped coins into her tip jar, whispering words of encouragement. Others simply watched in silence, moved by the emotion in her music. She had learned that kindness came in many forms, and tonight she was grateful for every gesture, no matter how small. Each tip, each smile, each attentive gaze reminded her that people could care even without knowing the full story behind her struggle. Then, during a short break between songs, she returned to her table where the tip jar sat. Inside, she noticed a folded napkin carefully placed beside the coins. It wasn't a bill, and it wasn't money, it was a small note. Her heart beat faster as she picked it up. The handwriting was neat and careful. She unfolded it and read the simple words written there. "You have a special gift. Why are you here alone, playing for money?" For a moment, she didn't know what to do. She had never shared her story with a stranger. She had learned to keep her struggles private, not because she wanted to hide them, but because she didn't know how people would react. Sometimes people didn't understand. Sometimes they judged. Sometimes they ignored. But something about this note felt different. It wasn't just curiosity, it was kindness. It was concern. It was attention in the way she had always hoped for. Her hands shook slightly as she grabbed the pen and wrote back on a clean napkin. She tried to explain in simple words that she was saving money for surgery, that her family couldn't afford it on their own, and that she loved music and hoped it could help. She didn't write much, just enough to convey the truth, the hope, and the worry that weighed on her young shoulders. She folded the note carefully and placed it back near the tip jar. Unsure if the person who left the first note would see it again, the man at the back table, who had been quietly observing her, noticed her actions. He picked up the napkin, reading her words carefully. His expression softened and he leaned back in his chair, taking a moment to think. He wasn't looking for attention and he didn't make a scene. But inside he felt a surge of emotion. Here was a young girl, giving everything she had in music, carrying a heavy burden, and still playing with courage, grace, and hope. The restaurant continued to hum around them. Diners talked quietly, waiters moved between tables, and the faint sound of clinking dishes filled the background. But in that small corner, a quiet exchange was happening, a silent conversation through notes and music. The girl didn't know who the man was, only that someone had noticed her struggle. Someone had reached out in a small but meaningful way. And that small gesture made her heart feel lighter. If only for a moment. Her parents watched from their table, sensing that something unusual was happening. They noticed the way the man at the back table had paid attention, how he had reached for the napkin she had left. They exchanged a quiet glance, a mix of curiosity and hope. Could this be someone who might help? Or was it just another stranger showing brief interest before moving on? They didn't know, but they stayed close, quietly supporting their daughter as she continued to play. After finishing her next song, she returned once more to her table. Her fingers lingered on the keyboard as she thought about the note. She realized that sometimes people could understand without knowing every detail. Sometimes a small gesture could speak louder than words. The napkin had reminded her of something she had almost forgotten, that there were people in the world willing to care. Willing to notice, willing to act without expecting anything in return. The man finally approached the girl quietly. His steps careful so as not to startle her. He didn't announce himself. He simply knelt slightly to her level, offering a warm, kind smile. "I read your note," he said softly. "You have a rare courage, and your music, it's incredible." The girl's eyes widened in surprise. She didn't expect a stranger to speak so gently, to notice so clearly, to respond with kindness instead of judgment. I just want to help," he continued, his voice calm but firm. "Not for recognition, not for applause, but because I can. And I think you deserve it." The girl felt a lump in her throat. She had never imagined that someone would step forward in this way. She had played countless nights hoping for small kindnesses, but never like this. The words, simple as they were, felt like a promise of hope. Her parents quickly joined, their expressions a mix of disbelief and gratitude. They listened quietly as the man asked about the situation, not pushing, not prying, just listening. They explained gently, speaking the truth of their struggles and the hope they had placed in their daughter's music. Every word carried weight, every explanation a reminder of how far they had come and how much they still needed help. Without making a show of it. The man nodded thoughtfully. "I'll help," he said simply. No cameras, no public attention, no pressure. Just a quiet, generous act that would change their lives in ways they couldn't yet imagine. The girl's heart raced. She didn't fully understand what this meant yet, but she knew it was real. The weight that had pressed on her shoulders for so long began to lift, replaced by something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. The girl continued to play, but her music carried a new lightness, a new joy. Every note felt freer, every chord more meaningful. Her parents watched in awe, seeing not just the talent, but the resilience, courage, and hope that had carried her through so many challenges. And in that quiet corner of the restaurant, a simple exchange of notes and a single act of kindness had begun to transform their world. By the time the restaurant closed for the night, the girl had packed up her keyboard with care, her heart full and her mind buzzing with the possibilities of the days to come. She didn't know exactly what the future held, only that tonight had shown her something important, that courage, honesty, and the willingness to reach out could touch lives in ways no one could anticipate. As they walked home together, her parents holding her hands and smiling through tears, the girl felt a quiet sense of promise. She had started her journey with music to help her family in small ways, and now a stranger's kindness had opened the door to something far greater. She didn't yet know how far it would go, but she understood one thing clearly: hope, once noticed and nurtured, could grow into something extraordinary. That night, the girl lay in bed, thinking about the napkin, the words, and the man's quiet kindness. She imagined the future with a mix of excitement and nervousness. She thought about her music, about the upcoming surgery, and about the people who cared enough to notice. And as she drifted off to sleep, her heart carried a single, simple truth, that even in the darkest moments, A little kindness, a little attention, and a little hope could change everything. The next morning, the girl woke up with a quiet sense of hope she hadn't felt in a long time. The napkin, the note, and the stranger's words from last night kept running through her mind. She didn't fully understand everything that had happened, but she knew one thing: someone had noticed her struggle, and that someone cared enough to reach out. It was a feeling that made her chest warm and her heart beat a little faster. Her parents noticed the change immediately. Breakfast was quiet, but they could see it in her eyes. She smiled more freely, her movements lighter, and she hummed small tunes as she ate. They didn't push her to talk about the night before. They simply watched, understanding that something special had happened, even if they didn't yet know all the details. Their pride in their daughter grew with every glance, and a quiet relief settled over them, replacing some of the worry that had been there for months. Later that day, the stranger returned to the restaurant. The girl hadn't expected to see him again so soon. He entered quietly, carrying nothing with him, and gave a small, polite smile as he approached her corner. She felt nervous, unsure of what to say. But he didn't hurry her. He waited calmly, allowing her to continue her music. She began playing softly, letting the melodies fill the room as she always did. He watched quietly, his attention focused but gentle. Every now and then, he would nod slightly or smile in encouragement. The girl could feel his presence, and it made her music flow more naturally. It was as if someone had finally understood the story she had been trying to tell all along. She wasn't performing for coins anymore. She was performing for understanding, for connection, and for hope. When she finished her first piece, he stepped closer, speaking in a low, calm voice. "Your music is amazing," he said. "It has a kind of honesty that you don't find very often. You put so much heart into every note." The girl's eyes widened. Compliments were not new to her, but this felt different. There was no flattery or exaggeration. He wasn't saying it to be polite or to impress anyone. He meant it, and she could feel it in the way he looked at her. Her parents approached quietly, standing behind her with soft smiles. The stranger turned to them, his tone respectful. "I want to help," he said simply. "I read the note she left, and I understand the situation. I want to make sure she gets the care she needs." Her mother's hand flew to her mouth, trying to hold back tears. Her father's eyes widened in disbelief. The idea that someone they didn't know would step forward like this was overwhelming. They had worked so hard to manage the bills, scraping together every possible penny, and now, a single act of kindness had the potential to lift that burden completely. The girl didn't know how to react at first. She had always been careful, cautious about strangers and their intentions. But there was something in his presence, sincere and patient, that made it impossible not to trust him. She nodded slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you," she said. "I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," he replied gently. "You just need to focus on what you love, your music. That's your gift, and it's something beautiful. The rest, we can take care of." His words were simple, but they carried a weight that lifted a heavy burden from her shoulders. She felt her chest loosen, as if 1,000 worries had been swept away in a single moment. The stranger asked her parents some questions quietly, listening as they explained the situation. He didn't rush them or interrupt. He only wanted to understand enough to know how he could help. His calm presence made it easier for them to speak honestly, to share their worries, and to describe the challenges they had faced. Every word they spoke was met with patience and respect, and they felt a growing sense of relief. After a while, he made it clear that he wanted to cover the cost of the surgery. There were no conditions, no requirements, no cameras, no publicity, just quiet, sincere help. The parents were overwhelmed with gratitude. They wanted to thank him properly, to express the relief and hope they now felt, but words seemed insufficient. Tears filled their eyes as they exchanged glances, silently acknowledging that their daughter's future had just changed in a single, extraordinary moment. The girl's fingers rested lightly on the keys of her keyboard. Her heart was pounding, but not with fear. It was excitement, hope, and a little disbelief all mixed together. She had played countless nights, hoping for small kindnesses, hoping for a little understanding. But she had never imagined something like this could happen. And yet, here it was a stranger, moved by her courage, offering a gift that would change her life forever. He smiled at her again. "You don't have to worry about anything anymore," he said. "Your focus should be on your music, on your dreams, and on being yourself. The rest, it's taken care of." She felt tears prick her eyes. She wanted to say something meaningful, but the words seemed to vanish. Finally, she managed a quiet, "Thank you. I'll never forget this." The stranger nodded, then took a step back, giving her space. "I don't need you to remember me," he said softly. "I just want you to remember this moment, the courage you showed, the music you played, and the hope you carried. That's what matters." After he left, the girl sat in the corner of the restaurant for a long time, her hands still on the keyboard. She didn't play right away. She just sat, thinking about what had happened, trying to absorb the reality. The tension she had carried for months, the fear and uncertainty about the surgery and bills, began to dissolve. For the first time, she felt light, free, and hopeful. Her parents joined her, wrapping their arms around her in a quiet embrace. They whispered words of encouragement, pride, and love. "You've worked so hard," her mother said. "And now you don't have to carry this weight alone anymore." Her father added, "This is a new beginning for all of us. You've earned this, and we are so proud of you." The girl finally began to play again, softly at first, then with more confidence. Each note carried a different energy, a new joy. Her music no longer reflected worry or fear, but hope, courage, and gratitude. The diners who had stayed to listen watched quietly, sensing the change in her performance. There was a new lightness, a warmth that hadn't been there before. Every note seemed to shine with the happiness and relief she felt inside. In the days that followed, the family prepared for the surgery. The girl continued to play at the restaurant, but now each performance felt different. She played not out of desperation, but out of joy and gratitude. Her parents could relax a little, knowing that the future was no longer uncertain. They felt the difference that one act of kindness could make, and they marveled at the quiet generosity that had changed their lives. The girl's music began to reach more people as well. Diners noticed the change in her performances. Some left coins and notes, some offered words of encouragement, and all of them could feel the hope that had grown in her heart. She had always played from the heart, but now the heart she played from was lighter, freer, and filled with a sense of possibility. Her parents watched proudly, seeing not just the talent, but the courage, perseverance, and hope that had carried their daughter through so many challenges. They realized that this wasn't just a gift for the surgery, it was a gift for her spirit, her confidence, and her belief in the kindness of others. The girl, sitting in the corner of the restaurant, playing her music with renewed joy, understood something very important. Courage and persistence could attract kindness. Honesty and sincerity could touch hearts. And even in the darkest moments, hope could arrive in unexpected ways, sometimes from strangers who noticed and cared enough to act. The quiet man who had stepped into their lives had done more than pay for a surgery. He had shown them what compassion could do, and in doing so, he had opened a door to a brighter, freer, and more hopeful future. The girl knew she would never forget that evening, that moment, and the kindness that had changed everything. And as she played into the evening, her music no longer carried the weight of worry, but the lightness of hope. Each note seemed to echo the gratitude in her heart, a melody that told a simple truth, that one person's kindness could change a life forever. The weeks that followed were filled with anticipation, hope, and careful preparation. The girl and her parents had never imagined that a single evening at the restaurant could change everything. Thanks to the quiet stranger who had noticed her music, her medical surgery, which had once seemed impossible, was now fully arranged. The hospital appointments were scheduled, the paperwork completed, and the financial burden that had weighed so heavily on the family was gone. For the first time in a long while, the family could breathe easily. The girl continued to play at the restaurant in the days leading up to the surgery. Her performances had taken on a new meaning. She no longer played out of worry or necessity, but out of joy and gratitude. Each note she pressed on her keyboard felt lighter, freer, and more meaningful. Diners noticed the change immediately. Her music was no longer just skillful, it carried a sense of relief, hope, and happiness that touched everyone who listened. People whispered to each other, commenting on the way her music seemed to shine with emotion, as if it told a story far beyond what anyone could see. Her parents watched with pride. They had always known she was talented, but now they saw something deeper: resilience, courage, and the ability to inspire others without even realizing it. They noticed the way people leaned in to listen, how some dropped extra coins into her tip jar, and how strangers offered kind words and encouragement. The family understood that the girl's music was more than notes. It was a bridge to hearts, a way to connect, and a quiet reminder of the power of hope. The day of the surgery arrived. The girl was nervous, as anyone would be, but she was also calm in a way that surprised even her parents. She had faced so many challenges already, and now she knew that she wasn't facing this one alone. The stranger's help had not only provided financial support, but had also given her a sense of security, trust, and belief in the goodness of people. As they entered the hospital, she held her parents' hands tightly, feeling the warmth and reassurance of their presence. The surgery itself went smoothly. The doctors were kind and professional, explaining everything carefully and making sure the girl and her parents felt comfortable. When it was over, the family waited anxiously for the news. Hours passed slowly, but finally the doctor emerged with a smile. The surgery had been successful. The girl would recover fully, and the medical condition that had caused so much worry for months was now resolved. Relief washed over the family in waves. They hugged each other tightly, tears streaming down their faces. In the days following the surgery, the girl began her recovery at home. It was a slow process, requiring rest, care, and patience. But even in the quiet moments of recovery, she found joy in small things. She hummed little tunes, tapped her fingers lightly on the edge of the table, and imagined the music she would play again at the restaurant. Each day brought small improvements, and with every passing moment, her hope and confidence grew stronger. Her parents were amazed at her resilience. They had worried about how she would handle the stress and recovery, but she surprised them with her strength. She laughed, sang softly, and even began composing new music, inspired by everything she had experienced. The surgery had given her more than health. It had given her a renewed sense of possibility, a reminder that courage and honesty could lead to unexpected kindness and support. A few weeks later, she returned to the restaurant to play again. The moment she entered, she felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. The familiar smells, the soft lighting, and the hum of conversation greeted her. But this time, everything felt different. She wasn't performing for money or to raise funds. She was performing for herself, for the joy of music, and for the people who had been part of her journey. The diners noticed immediately. There was a new energy in her music, a lightness, a clarity, and a warmth that wasn't there before. People whispered to each other, commenting on the emotion in her playing. Some left notes and coins, others simply listened quietly, moved by the performance. And the girl played with all her heart, letting the melodies carry her gratitude, hope, and joy into the room. Her parents watched from their usual table, smiling proudly. They remembered the difficult months, the constant worry, the countless nights spent hoping and praying for help. And now they could see the difference that one act of kindness had made. Their daughter's life had been transformed, not just medically, but emotionally, spiritually, and creatively. They realized that generosity, when paired with courage and honesty, could create ripples that touched lives in profound ways. The girl also took a moment to think about the stranger who had helped them. She didn't see him often, but she never forgot the quiet way he had stepped into their lives. His kindness had not been loud or boastful. It had been simple, sincere, and powerful. He had given them more than money. He had given them hope, trust, and the belief that good people still existed in the world. Months passed, and the girl continued to play regularly at the restaurant. Her music grew stronger, more expressive, and more confident. She began to compose new songs inspired by her journey, the hope she had carried, the courage she had found, and the kindness she had received. Diners who had been coming for months noticed the evolution in her playing. They commented on the emotion, the skill, and the beauty in every note. Some even left messages in the tip jar, sharing their own experiences of hope and encouragement. The parents also noticed a change in their daughter's spirit. She was happier, more confident, and more determined than ever. The surgery had healed her physically, but the support she had received had strengthened her heart. She carried herself with quiet confidence, a deeper understanding of kindness, and a growing sense of responsibility to use her music not just for herself, but to inspire others. The story of her journey, though mostly private, began to spread quietly. People who had been touched by her music shared the story with friends, emphasizing the quiet generosity that had made it all possible. The stranger's actions became a symbol of hope and compassion, a reminder that even small acts of kindness could have life-changing consequences. And for the girl, the story was a reminder that honesty, courage, and perseverance could lead to incredible outcomes. One evening, after finishing a performance, she left a small handwritten note at the restaurant. It was a simple message of thanks, expressing her gratitude for the kindness and support that had allowed her to continue playing and to heal. She didn't know if the stranger would see it, but the act of writing the note gave her a sense of closure and appreciation. It was her way of acknowledging the gift that had transformed her life. Life slowly returned to a new kind of normal. The girl continued school, practiced music daily, and spent time with her family. She no longer carried the heavy worry about surgery and bills. Instead, she carried hope, determination, and a sense of gratitude that shaped every part of her day. She had learned lessons that would stay with her forever, that courage could attract kindness, that honesty could inspire trust, and that one person's generosity could change an entire life. Her parents often reflected on the journey as well. They remembered the struggles, the nights of worry, the small victories, and the overwhelming relief when help arrived. They were filled with gratitude, not just for the surgery, but for the way kindness had shown them the power of human connection. They realized that even in the most challenging times, hope could appear when they least expected it, sometimes from the most unexpected places. As the girl grew older, she continued to play music, always remembering the journey that had brought her to that point. She performed not just for money, but to share joy, hope, and inspiration. She carried the lessons of kindness and generosity with her, understanding that every note she played could touch someone's heart. Just as hers had been touched, her story became a quiet inspiration for those who heard it. It wasn't famous, it wasn't loud, but it was real. It showed that courage, honesty, and perseverance could create ripples of kindness. It showed that one person's attention and compassion could change a life completely. And for the girl, it was a lifelong reminder that music, hope, and human kindness were powerful forces that could transform even the most difficult moments into opportunities for growth and happiness. And so, life moved forward. The girl's music continued to fill the restaurant. Her parents watched with pride, and the memory of the quiet stranger's help remained a cherished part of her story. Each note she played carried the echo of gratitude, hope, and joy. And though the world was large and full of challenges, she had learned that a single act of kindness could create a future brighter than she had ever imagined. The journey that had begun with quiet courage and a few coins in a tip jar had grown into a story of hope, resilience, and human connection. The girl's life had been transformed in ways that were tangible and lasting, not because she asked for help, but because she showed courage, shared her gift, and trusted that kindness existed in the world. Her music became a symbol, a reminder, and a celebration of what is possible when people care. And every evening, as she played her keyboard in that familiar corner, she smiled softly, knowing that hope and kindness could change lives, and that her life had been forever changed by a single act of quiet generosity.